Meow is what you would say if Feral is your main in Dragonflight, choosing the correct melee spec to play as the best melee spec to play, because Feral is the best melee spec to play in Dragonflight. On our opinion, subjective, I don't care, it's the best, and if you're not convinced, then you probably missed our TLF from yesterday. If you watch this video when it's published, when you should be watching, so that the video and the algorithm can grow and get bigger. And TLFs are not the only thing that we do on our channel. We do these videos daily whenever we don't do the TLFs, and we do opinion pieces on cooldown, news, shows, all of that good stuff, plus the weekly main videos on what classes to main in Dragonflight, and we will have Druid soon, don't worry about it. And if you like this type of content, consider becoming one of our Patreons. The Patreon link is down in the description. The Patreon platform supports everything that we do. It makes it able for us to be able to do these types of videos on a daily basis and give you guys what you need, what you want, what you need in your life in terms of WoW content. Plus, you can find a certain amount of goodies depending on what tier Patreon you want to be a part of. And we would be super grateful for all of your support. And that will essentially let us able to keep doing these videos for you, even as the Dragonflight releases and there's no more beta to test. What shall we do then? Well, I guess we'll have to see, and you'll have to check it out. But first, let's talk about Feral, because Feral has received some changes, some updates. Now, we have done a couple of videos on Feral over the course of the last couple of months based on alpha and beta, and it has gone from a terrible, poopy, garbage, steaming pile of Shadowlands, sorry, excuse me, I couldn't get it out. And now it's, funny enough, looking to be one of the coolest melee DPS in the game. Let's see what's making it so. And first of all, in the general talent tree, not a lot changed. Actually, not pretty much anything changed, I don't think, except for the capstone on the bottom left-hand side, which you could say it's the, you know, the Feral capstone. The Führer has been changed to Protector of the Pack, which right now what it does is stores 10% of your damage up to a certain amount, and then your next regrowth consumes all sword damage to increase its healing, which is kind of nice because, you know, Feral kind of has these instant regrowths here and there, which adds like a buttload of sustain. Obviously, you can use this on your party members to actually heal them for a little bit more chunky heals, but it's boring. It's really boring. It doesn't feel like a capstone, but hey, it's probably, it kind of aligns better with the other capstones in terms of, like, you know, we don't want them to do a lot of damage, we don't want a lot of throughputs to the capstones, and we don't want them to feel like they're mandatory, although I know Ferals everywhere cry that they are still without their Führer, or let's say leader of the pack, which Ferals have been wanting since forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And with that out of the way, let's actually check the spec talent tree and what has changed since our last video. Now, if you haven't checked that out, you can still check it out after this one. But first of all, we're gonna talk about what currently is changed. So to start off with, there are a few things that are new. First of all, Primal Claws are just right at the top, right below Tiger's Fury. And what they do is your combo point generating abilities have a 10% chance, 20% chance if you put the point 2 points in, to generate one extra combo point, which obviously, you know, it's a Feral roguey type mechanic. It's not that bad, it's good. You might take it, you might not. It kind of depends on your point economy. Underneath it, coming from the sides, of course, you will have Predator, which has been one of the coolest talents that you can get as Feral in dungeons. It was always at a choice in the old talent tree with Saber Tooth, and now you can have it 100% of the time. Obviously, might not prove to be particularly amazing in raids, unless you have some ads that you can, you know, use to reset Tiger Fury on, but if it's not consistent, maybe the point investment might be better somewhere else. And from it, slightly down to the right-hand side, you have Pouncing Strikes, which previous to this was in the place of Predator, and Predator in the place of it. Pouncing Strikes makes a while Stealth Break, also stuns the target for 4 seconds and deals 60% increased damage, while Stealth Shred deals 60% increased damage and has double the chance to critically strike and generate 1 additional combo point. Guiltius, if you don't know who Guiltius is, you haven't been watching some of our spec podcasts, is one of the most outspoken Feral theory crafters, and I would go a long way to say maybe one of the biggest reasons as to why Feral has gotten so many good changes. Has made an interesting point about this in one of his recent tweets, and that is Feral is the only spec that has to spec into Rake dealing taunt out of stealth, which was a little bit weird. But whatever, right? This is basically something that has been kind of like a passive for Feral for a long time. It is something that you have to talent into, whether or not you like that stuff. I mean, we've seen specs kind of get rid of these types of talents that were kind of like baseline mechanics to make the spec function. Not to mention that, you know, certain Berserk upgrades let you use the stealth mechanic, and so, you know, that might be something to think about. And from Predator, still on a dead end, you now have Tireless Energy, a 2-point investment that increases the maximum energy and energy regeneration rate, which is something to be debated, but something that needs to be simmed, because in terms of energy regeneration, Feral hasn't really used haste often recently, almost ever, although this might change with how bleeds impact the playstyle in Dragonflight. But since you never really took haste, which haste for energy classes affects directly the regeneration of your energy, this might be something that you want to take, especially if you don't spec into, or if you don't gear rather, into a lot of haste items. On the right hand side, Double Clawed Rake is a little bit more accessible now, and in its place you have Lunar Inspiration, which was on the far left hand side. Double Clawed Rake is one of the new things that make Feral really cool, although whether or not you're going to be using it remains to be seen. Rake also applies Rake to one additional nearby target. It's pretty cool. Rake used to be one of the biggest sources of damage in the Feral's kits, especially when it comes to AoE. When you spread a lot of stuff, Rake used to do a lot of damage. We'll see how that damage profile changes in Dragonflight, and from it downwards you have Lunar Inspiration, which is again something that Feral didn't really play a lot with. Moonfire is usable in cat form, costs 30 energy and generates 1 combo point. This is a very specific talent because the tuning of Moonfire has to justify you taking this and using Moonfire instead of something else, although that would make it a little bit ridiculous since Moonfire doesn't have any cooldowns, so there would be no reason not to use Moonfire instead of Shred if the damage would be tuned in such a way. So likely this is to make it so that you can spam, let's say, Moonfires whenever there's a fight where you cannot stay on the boss for whatever reason. You can use Lunar Inspiration to, you know, generate those combo points when you have downtime. Other than that, I'm not 100% sure where you would see this type of mechanic work, unless, you know, if I'm not mistaken, this used to work somewhere differently. But if with Moonfire can be something like where Guardian is, where you occasionally get a proc where it deals a massive amount of damage, so that you spend it on procs instead of spending it on every global, then yeah, Lunar Inspiration is a little bit Moonfire as a cat, I don't know. Under Taste for Blood, we have Dreadful Bleeding instead of Ferocious Frenzy, and this may synergize more with the Tear Open Wounds, or to compensate for the nerf that it got from 75% damage to 60% damage. Taste for Blood essentially makes Ferocious Bite deal 2% increased damage for each of your bleeds on the target, and Dreadful Bleeding increases rip damage by 20%. And lastly, Tear Open Wounds is again one of the coolest new mechanic that made Feral so much better to play in dungeons. Primal Wrath consumes up to 4 seconds of rip damage on targets it hits and deals 60% of it instantly, which is really cool. It definitely has that burst, and actually Feral felt like it had AoE burst, which is new. It's a new thing. I love this. This is something that I'm gonna play with 100% of the time whenever I'm doing Mythic Plus in Dragonflight. On a dead end of the right hand side, you now have Relentless Predator, which it reduces the energy cost of Ferocious Bite by 20%. This is likely going to be something more akin to single target, since that's probably when you're going to be pressing Ferocious Bite the most as a finisher. And Berserker Frenzy was nerfed a little from 150% to 125%, which is the, let's say, one of the Berserk upgrades. So if you're not aware of, Berserk can essentially be upgraded a bunch of times for both Feral and Guardian at the moment in their talent tree. Berserk is the talent in the middle. It's your basic cooldown 3 minutes, which says go Berserk for 20 seconds. While Berserk, your finishing moves have 20% chance per combo point spent to refund 2 combo points. Swipe generates 1 additional combo points. Rake and Shred deal damage as though you were stealth, which, you know, brings us back to Pouncing Strikes. And you can upgrade that with Berserk Frenzy that we were just talking about, where during your Berserk, your combo point generating abilities bleed the target for an additional 125% of their damage over 8 seconds, which, I'm not mistaken, This is a mechanic that we have in Shadowlands. For the life of me, I cannot remember if it's a legendary, if it's a tier set, or if it's a conduit, but it's one of those things that influences the Berserk playstyle. And I don't know if this is gonna continue in Shadowlands, but at least in if this is continuing in Dragonflight, but at least in Shadowlands, this is one of the reasons why during Berserk, especially in AoE, you would not build up to 5 combo points. You would just pop a combo point, finisher, combo point, finisher, combo point, finisher. This would obviously, you know, affect that as well, since you would be using, you would be applying more of those combo point generating ability bleeds on your target. Whether or not that's going to remain the same, we'll see. Another thing that has changed is Apex Predator's Craving, which is the legendary that we had right now in Shadowlands, and is now a capstone. What this does, if you aren't familiar, if you haven't played Shadowlands Feral, rip damage has a 4% chance to make your next ferocious bite free and deal the maximum damage, which is pretty good considering that, you know, you're going to, especially in AoE, since you're going to have like a lot of rips out on a lot of targets. Also, this has been something that was pretty cool to use in single target as well. And we've kind of looked at pretty much everything that changed on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, you have on the closer to the top in the before the first gate of the talent, Protective Growth. Your regrowth protects you, reducing all damage you take by 5% while your regrowth is on you, which obviously promotes using your regrowth consistently on you, which is something that you might have done or not. This is something that particularly I was used to be doing, since it did back in BFA, it did enable blood talent, which that has been taken away. But this is particularly cool because, you know, you're of course healing yourself. You do have the capstone that I mentioned in the general talent tree that also increases the healing of regrowth. Now it also reduces the damage that you take. So overall, you're slightly more tanky, although this does come to become a little bit of an issue since one of your globals will always have to be regrowth, which is particularly annoying. However, if there ever is downtime on you from the, you know, the predatory strikes, or if the predatory swiftness rather, you can afford to actually use an ability that doesn't generate combo points because you're waiting for that energy to pull up, and then you can just, you know, cast these regrowths without any issues. Now, on the right-hand side to it, you have Saber Tooth, which is something that people have been either loving or hating. Ferocious Bite deals 15% increased damage and increases all damage dealt by rip by 5% per combo point spent for 4 seconds. Basically, this has been changed to function the way that it does right now, and no longer makes bite, Ferocious Bite rather, extend the duration of rip, so you never have to cast rip. But personally, I kind of like this new version of Saber Tooth. It's more interesting and it feels like it interacts with the rotation a little bit more. And Rampant Ferocity going down from Saber Tooth is the old Ferocious Frenzy, and what it does is Ferocious Bite hits all nearby enemies affected by your rip for 20% of the damage dealt. Damage reduced beyond 5 targets has been slightly nerfed by 5%, and it's now up to the 20% cap, which is another way that you can deal damage in AoE, which is pretty cool because your Ferocious Bite gets to cleave on every target that's affected by rip, again promoting that rip spread. So they kind of work in conjunction with each other. Really cool. One talent that has been moved as kind of a dead end, which is cool that we see stuff like this, is Infected Wounds. Rake damage increased by 30%, which is quite a bit of damage increase to Rake, and Rake causes infected wounds on a target, reducing the target movement by 20% for 12 seconds. First of all, this is like half a utility, half damage increase for your Rake, and although Rake 30% extra damage on Rake can be quite good, especially if you play the double clawed Rake that we mentioned earlier. This can be really interesting in AoE, although outside of that, it is a point investment. You could take it, but likely there are way other talents that you might want, in particular in single target, especially if you don't go for Rake spreading as a way of playstyle. Also, as a choice node with Raging Fury, you now have Tiger's Tenacity, which is right below Infected Wounds, although you have to path to it from Predatory Swiftness. What this does is Raging Fury makes finishing moves extend the duration of Tiger Fury by 0.4 seconds per combo point spent. So let's say you do it 5 seconds, that's 5 combo points. That means you extend Tiger's Fury by 2 seconds. You won't be able to get like 100% uptime based on how the rotation functions, but you can extend it to a decent amount where, especially in AoE, can be really interesting. While Tiger's Tenacity makes Tiger's Fury cause your next 3 finishing moves to restore 1 combo point, which is again an interesting addition to the playstyle, has interesting mechanics. They both function differently, so I guess it either comes down to what you prefer or it comes down to what sims the best, depending on how you want to play your Feral. And Tiger's Tenacity, before it became a choice node, was in the middle side of the talent tree before it was moved, and now it's in its place. You have Fanatic Momentum, which was made a 2-pointer, makes finishing move have a 3% chance per combo points to grant 3% haste for 6 seconds. And obviously that doubles with the second point placed in, and this is right under Survival Instincts. Feral Frenzy, like its counterpart on the right hand side, was made a capstone and got another way to get it from the choice node on the left hand side. So there's 2 paths that you can take to get to Feral Frenzy, and one of them is with Carnivorous Instinct. Tiger's free damage bonus is increased by 6%. It's a 2-pointer, so that's 12%, or you can go through the choice node. One good thing that also happened is with Adaptive Swarm, which is not really a capstone but does have a capstone upgrade in Unbridled Swarm, is now a 1-point investment instead of a 2-point investment, which is so much better because I don't think there's a single spec that has capstones require you 2 points to invest in them, feel good in any specific way. And Ashamane's Guidance got a tooltip updated to showcase how the legendary from the Night Fae was before. What this means is basically this upgrades either Incarnation or Convoke, depending on which one you've picked in the previous choice node, and it makes either your melee attacks have a chance to activate Incarnation for 6 seconds without the ability to enter in stealth, or if you pick Convoke, the Spirit's cooldown is reduced by 50% and its duration and the number of spells cast is reduced by 25%, similar to what we've seen to Balanced Druid. Convoke the Spirits has an increased chance to use an exceptional spell or ability, so it's basically the Night Fae Covenant legendary ability, and it's probably slightly better because if I'm not mistaken, the Covenant ability reduces the number of spell cast by 50% also. But does have the increased chance of an exceptional spell being used. And with that, we kind of covered most of the changes in the talent tree, and we can talk slightly about the tier set since last time. We do have the tier set now, and we've been able to test it and actually have some opinions about it. And if you have kept up with what the Feral tier set has been ever since it was announced, it has been buffed a little bit, but what it does right now, the 2-step bonus makes Ferocious Bite and Rip damage bonus increase to 8%. And the 4-set makes for each combo point spent, finishing moves increase your bleed damage by 4% and increase the chance for your attacks that generate combo points to critically strike by 2% for 4 seconds. Very simple, very straightforward. They essentially mentioned that they don't want the tier sets to, alter your rotation or playstyles in any way or force you to take certain talents over others, although that kind of inadvertently does so for certain specs. It's not completely obvious if it does so for Feral, but if it does, I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be the worst thing in the world. However, I do understand their philosophy in making the tier set simple in a way so that you can experiment with the talents and not feel forced by the tier set to play a specific build when you have all of these new toys to play with. And that pretty much covers the Feral. Like we mentioned, in our opinion here at Martian Online, we kind of consider Feral to be one of the best melee specs right now, which is so cool to see and talk about considering where it was a couple of months ago when it was first announced on Alpha. What a way to come back, and this gives us hope that a lot of other classes and specs can reach this status of being really cool, potentially the best in the game. I'm talking about you Red Paladins and Paladins in general, but I digress. What do you guys think about the Feral, and what exactly is your main? If it's not going to be Feral, leave us a comment down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you Patreons for supporting the content, and we will see you in the next one. Bye bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.